This week on Intelligence as a Dump Stat, a man who likes the number two makes a post about player agency that is certainly a number two. A reply to Angry Games Incorporated misses all the points about D&D 3.5. Chess.com decides to go woke in the most milquetoast way imaginable. And a hippie found religion. Now she needs to find a clue. Welcome, TTRPG enthusiasts, to Driving and Dragons, your go-to source for TTRPG commentary, world building, and game running philosophy, and a weekly dose of hot takes on the week's lukewarm takes, backed with sub-zero IQs. This week was actually a bit slow. With all the hype and focus on Shadow Dark's second wildly successful Kickstarter dominating the scene, there wasn't much time for questionable remarks about how games are played or how tables are run, so we actually had to drift into some gaming adjacent lanes to ferret out all the stupid. The first instance all stemmed from Harmony Ginger. She put out an opinion that the traditional JRPG format in video games makes them not actually role-playing games, as the aggressively linear nature removes player agency and thus prevents the player from truly playing a role. There is a lot of nuance here and a great conversation to be had about at what point a linear progression becomes a railroad and at what point that railroad actually removes agency from the player. However, buried in the replies, we find this gem. The account is AD&D 2E and Pathfinder 2E. A man with an apparent taste for the second worst version of D&D and a piezo ripoff of the worst version of D&D. There's just no accounting for bad taste, I guess. This, my 40 years DM, and in this case, he does often start posts unironically with a proclamation that he has been in the TTRPG hobby for 40 years. He stated that never once in all his years had he heard of players or any DM mentioning player agency. A DM narrates adventures, players decide, complete with the obligatory hashtags for D&D, AD&D, and Pathfinder 2. At this point, if a person has never heard of player agency, he really isn't qualified to comment on TTRPGs at all. I heard about player agency back in the late 90s when I was first learning how to play, and if I recall correctly, at least the 3rd edition D&D core books use the term directly. Player agency is one of the core principles of TTRPGs, and without it, a DM is just playing with themselves. I can't tell if he is somehow trying to make the argument that player agency isn't a thing, or that it is some kind of new concept brought on by the Sparkle Trolls. But this is even worse than the dummies who try to act like Session Zero is a safety tool brought in to ruin their games when they've been doing it their entire lives. In further reply news, the angry GM comes back with what was actually a very good observation. He pointed out that commentary was all a war between the incomplete concept car of the TTRPG world, D&D and all of its late 70s iterations, and D&D 2024. He then referenced 3.5e as the evolution and completion of AD&D, implying that it is the good version in its final form before D&D went to crap starting in 4e. I happen to agree with this. 3.5 is the most complete and well-designed game to ever bear the Dungeons & Dragons name. But in pops Scott Graham with the most common garbage take made in discussions of 3.5e. A take based completely on missing the point that 3.5 is modular and was designed to be that way. Now, Scott is the one getting picked on here, but he is by no means the worst version of this retarded take that appeared on that X thread. If anything, he's here because he at least puts it into intelligent language, even if the point lacks that particular attribute. Quote, I'll certainly agree that the veneration given OD&D through AD&D is misplaced, as they were just a kludgy, minimally tested mismatch. But 3.5e, the edition that gave us jump diplomacy, that's your answer? Sure, any good GM will shut that shit down when it breaks common sense or common physics or common metaphysics or whatever. But trying to make rules that cover everything just ends up creating an encyclopedia of rules that only rules lawyers will ever truly lead, and they'll read specifically to find stupid loopholes and min-max exploits which will inevitably exist since nobody has time to playtest, analyze, and fix all that nonsense before publication. Unquote. Here's the problem with that take he's got there. 3.5e is explicit in the application of Rule 0. There is no rule that overrides the GM. It is also implicit in the strongest terms that 3.5e is meant to be modular, with the DM selecting the rules and variants suited to his game world. Nearly all of these exercises in mechanical analysis rely on disparate variant mechanics from numerous sources to function. Pun, for example, requires 9 different source books. 9. With an array of abilities that wouldn't logically exist together in most game worlds. It also requires a very specific and debatable interpretation of the text surrounding the manipulate form ability. Nearly all of these exploitative rulings require significant leeway and bending of multi-classing rules or very loose interpretations of non-specific restrictions on classes in order to exist, such as barbarians who change alignment at level 2 to become paladins or other alignment restricted classes after getting higher HP and movement speed. The point I'm making is that the comment that he made, and those like it, about 3.5e only makes sense if the person reading it completely misunderstands the way that 3.5 was designed to be run. Many of these things, even in the books they're brought up in, say that they're not all meant to be used together. There's variants for a reason. And that is really kind of the beauty of 3.5, is it relies on game master rulings. But if you have a game world or a play style or a campaign that has more frequent interaction or more detailed interaction with a certain type of situation, there are variants out there to dig deeper and make those work. You're not supposed to use them all at the same time. Nobody has time for that. There's hundreds of books out there in 3.5. And yes, if you try to use all of it and try to allow everything, you end up with a slop. But it was never meant to be that way. And the people who say that probably need to go back and read that 3.5 Dungeon Master's Guide, because it gives them all the answers for why they're wrong. Moving away from TTRPGs for a second, chess.com has apparently reached out to the community for a new name for the Bishop. Yes, the Bishop is apparently hyper offensive to someone. So the mental midgets over at chess.com are making a stand against this offense. Well, not really a stand, more like meekly raising their hand at the very back to whisper a complaint. This has been a non-issue for over 1,000 years. At this point, and chess.com is getting roasted over it, as they should. Of course, they even had to come back and ask people to stop suggesting Bishop as the new name for the piece, since that's virtually the only name suggestion that they got. Well, I mean, it's the only name suggestion that wasn't an inappropriate reference to various bodily functions. Bodily functions like the one that chess.com took on their X thread when they decided to post this abject stupidity. Got bad news. Chess is a game that requires a powerful intellect. An intellect that the folks over at chess.com seem to lack. Last up is the religious hippie. She's an at least nominally Catholic podcaster, though I doubt she realizes that the seat is empty given some of her religious takes and her posting of a mass fit, better known as the clothes she wore to mass, that seems to lack the appropriate head covering for going to mass. She is here for missing the point when it comes to masculinity, and this is also how it ties back to TTRPGs. She said this, quote, "Whenever I talk to my girlfriends who are looking for a husband and a good father to their future kids, here is always one reoccurring turnoff. Man children. Men who cosplay, even LOTR, are obsessed with Legos, Marvel, Star Wars, basically toys in general. It's the number one consistent complaint I hear from women, not only my friends, unquote. Well, hippie, you are part of the problem. First, X to doubt this is the number one complaint. They may not like or understand some of these guys' hobbies, but I'm willing to bet that fashion sense, job, bank account, habits at the house, these are all probably bigger complaints. Second, men do two things when they're left to their own devices. We build, we destroy. That's what we do. You want a good father? You want a man who uses his mind and imagination to design and create, the kind of man who teaches his sons to problem solve and to think, who teaches him to read and reason, who teaches him to value his interests and treat them with respect the way you want him to treat you with respect and value when he takes an interest in you? Is that what you want? I think it is. Or you could possibly want a guy who comes in with those manly interests that involve drinking and chasing skirt and aggressively asserting himself physically, maybe asserting himself physically over you in the kitchen when dinner is called. The point is that while no obsession is good, and yes, it is highly undesirable when any person tries to escape their life by living in a fantasy world. But perhaps you should be looking for the kind of qualities that those interests bring to the table and what they might impart to your children. It's bad enough that we have an education system that is designed to destroy young boys and crush any sense of wonder or desire to question or explore that they have. The last thing this world needs is self-righteous single women trying to do the same and then crying about the results later when their husband domes himself in the carport after yet another reminder that he failed to measure up to your standards. Well, on that downer, that's all I got this week. I'll see you next time, if not before, with some more actual gaming content. But do me a favor, hit the like button. There isn't much that you can do that will help the channel more in the algorithm than taking a half second to click that little thumbs up button, and I would really appreciate it. Otherwise, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.